And welcome to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next hour, I'm your host and your guide as together we'll cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone with a very special guest this hour. He is a talk show host, he is a researcher, he is an author, and he also served with pride and dignity in the American military, and I thank him for his service every time he's on. And I'm talking about my good friend Kevin Randle. And today, Kevin and I are going to be talking about what was that snoring session we watched the other day on TV? The subcommittee of the basement committee of the janitor committee, or as I call them, the Three Stooges.
I have no clue what we watched, but there certainly was nothing of interest there.
I was surprised that David Grush, I thought, was going to be this smoking gun, the Fox Mulder of the intelligence community, and it seems that he wasn't as intelligent as I thought he was going to be, because he wanted transparency, and yet that's the one thing he would not give to the public was transparency. Hard questions or proof was that, well, I can't tell it in open session, but I can behind doors, or, since we're on a skiff. Well, what the hell was it all about, Kevin? Why did they even have it?
I watched it because I wanted to hear what Grush had to say about his sources. Where did he get the information? Who did he talk to? We got none of that. It was the same thing that we've heard literally for months. Well, I talked to these people and they told me this. Some of them have direct knowledge, some of them don't. And I've said repeatedly, Don Schmidt, Tom Carey, and I talked to people who had direct knowledge. We named names. We provided sources. We told you how the information was gathered with Grush. We have none of that. We don't know anything about what he's heard. The only thing we know for certain is he mentioned 2 UFO crash retrievals in an earlier interview, one of them from 1933 in Italy, and the other was Roswell. It took me 2 hours to learn about the crash in Italy. And most Italian researchers believe it to be a hoax. I'm thinking if Grush is on the inside, he should have known that, because it didn't take me long to find that information. Of course, I'm in contact with people in the UFO field around the world, and he apparently is talking to people in the hallways of the Pentagon.
It was funny. He said he told lawmakers that he was informed of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. So he's got no firsthand experience.
None whatsoever.
So I wonder if he plays cards with Bob Lazar and the rest of the wannabe crew and came up with all this crap.
I think what's happened here is, of course, is my opinion, but I think what's happened here is in the course of his duties in the Pentagon, he heard some stories and believed them to be true, and didn't have a way of vetting them or didn't know who to contact, and he started talking about it. And now he's on the national stage, and it seems clear to me he doesn't have a good grounding, to use that term, grounding, in the UFO field.
It was funny to listen to the what was his name? Not the chairman, but Burchett. Tim Burchett, the rep from Tennessee. Right, who was saying that he was a UFO enthusiast. He got his first book at 10 years old, and how he basically showed that this inquiry was going to be tilted. And then he brought in the fact of his church, and George Knapp was there, and it was a circus, if anything.
Well, we had 3 witnesses. They didn't say anything that we hadn't heard them say in the past. There was nothing really new involved there. No real evidence was presented.
Yeah.
The 2 pilots at least could talk about firsthand experiences, seeing something strange. And what Fravor, I thought was interesting, mentioned that when he saw the tic-tac, it was on radar, but not on his aircraft, but on another aircraft, and radars in the fleet had picked it up. So there is some kind of a second chain of evidence, at least with his sighting, of something anomalous there that's maybe some sort of a glitch in the electronics as they just updated the electronics and things like that. I don't know that much about it, but they talked about how pilots are just starting to come forward. And I'm thinking, gee whiz, I've talked to any number of pilots. I did a book about the Washington National sightings in 1952. And in the course of that book, I actually quoted some of the pilots who were involved in intercepts over Washington, D.C. in July of 1952. So it's just, there's just nothing new there that I had not heard before.
Something that Graves said that grabbed my attention, Kevin, was if UAP are foreign drones, it is an urgent national security problem. If it is something else, it is an issue for science.
Certainly, if it's foreign drones, it's national security. But if it's something else, it's also national security. We can't have these foreign craft operating in our airspace.
Right.
You can look at it from the point of view of it's a hazard to aerial navigation because we don't know how they're controlled and who's controlling them or anything like that. And secondly, they could be spying on us, like the Chinese balloon that the president finally decided to shoot down after it had an opportunity to cross the entire United States. So yeah, there's a national security issue there that needs to be resolved. But we've had that same national security issue since 1947 with people talking about UFOs and these things flying through our skies. So it's an imperative national security issue because they've been around for 75 years. It's just suddenly we now have congressional interest in it.
Something else that what was his name? Fravor said that I found rather strange coming out of an aeronautics person who works in the defense industry when he said that, to his knowledge, there is no manned or unmanned craft that does not give off a heat signature that would not show up on FLIR. Now, am I correct in understanding that the F-117 Stealth does not give off a heat signature as part of its stealthing capabilities?
Yes, it does, but I think it's reduced. I think if you catch it in the right angle, there is a bit of a heat signature, but it's not the kind you would expect from an aircraft, a jet aircraft. It's a reduced heat signal. But yeah, there should be it should project an image on the FLIR, especially if it's traveling through colder air and it's putting out there's an exhaust, there's a heated exhaust, but it is dispersed quite a bit. It's reduced quite a bit.
Now, I understand that the tic-tac was going back to what year? 2004, 2002?
Yeah, it was something that happened quite a while ago. Nearly 20 years, I think.
So why is everybody putting so much focus and emphasis on the tic-tac if that is so long ago, and that maybe the technology of today would be able to identify what the tic-tac was compared to the technology that was available going back 20 years ago?
I think the reason we're getting the interest in the tic-tac is because we have the video that's basically unexplained at this time. The Pentagon may know what it is or may have identified it, and by doing so, they may, and announcing it, they may reveal national secret of some kind. A secret weapon is only secret as long as you never use it.
Right.
And I think if you've got a technology that's now identified the tic-tac for whatever it might have been, if it has been identified, then revealing that technology may give the enemies, our competitors in the world, some kind of clue as to how we detect that thing. If you look at some of the pictures from World War II, the Navy vessels, and you'll see these big white spotches on the top of the ships on their masts.
Right.
They'd taken out the photographs of the radar, so you couldn't see the radar dishes because they were afraid that would give some clues. In 1947, the size and shape of the atomic bomb was classified. Just the size and the shape was classified. So we look at these, the Pentagon looks at these things as a way of identifying stuff, but they're also afraid of giving clues about our capabilities in detection and identification.
Something else that I found rather coincidental was that both the gimbal and the tic-tac sighting were during training missions. Is it possible that this was part of a training exercise to see if they could actually detect whatever the gimbal and the tic-tac were, and that they were actually part of the exercise unbeknownst to the participants?
I think if they'd been unbeknownst to the participants at the time, they would have been identified during the debriefings at the end of the exercises. You guys didn't do this, and here's what we were doing, and you should have been able to spot that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And even if they hadn't done it then, once the videos were released, then rather than creating this mystery about them, they would have solved it right there and says, here's what it is. It's kind of like the Roswell crash. They've offered no explanation for it. There's no terrestrial explanation for what fell at Roswell, as far as I'm concerned. Doesn't mean it was an alien spacecraft. It just there was no explanation. And I would have thought in 1995, when Colonel Weaver and the Air Force was investigating the Roswell case, had they come up with an explanation that would have been classified in 1947, they would have trotted out immediately and said, here's what it was. The balloon explanation didn't work because the flight they listed as a culprit had been canceled. The documentation shows that we never flew, so it was not a viable explanation. So you look at that from that point of view. If there was some kind of an explanation, you would have thought they would have trotted it out, especially after the videos had made the news media and everybody was talking about them.
Strange times indeed. Listen, Kevin, you and I have got to take our first break. X Zone Nation, if you'd like to find out more about Kevin Randle and what he does, he has a show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. Just go to xzbn.net, where you can find Kevin's shows, listen to them with our compliments. And if you'd like to join us here live on air, and you're trying to figure out how to do that, just go to xzbn.net. All the information is right there on the front page. And Kevin, your website is kevinrandle.blogspot.com, right?
Absolutely. And there's an analysis of yesterday's briefing up there already.
2 words?
Big yawn.
Kevin Randle's my special guest. I'll be back on the other side as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
Are you ready to dive into the mysteries of the unknown? Tune into the electrifying X Zone radio TV show hosted by the one and only Rob McConnell.
I'm Rob McConnell, and get ready for a mind-bending journey through the unexplained phenomenon that surrounds us all. From UFO encounters to cryptids, ghosts, and everything in between, we've got it covered here in the X Zone.
Rob McConnell, the seasoned investigator and renowned radio personality, brings you the most compelling interviews with top experts, authors, and experiencers from around the world. Each episode is an unforgettable exploration into the depths of the extraordinary.
That's right, X Zone Nation. Join me every week as we open the door to the supernatural and explore the strange and amazing stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.
And it's not just radio anymore. With our groundbreaking TV show, you can now witness the sessions unfold right before your eyes. From chilling reenactments to captivating visuals, prepare yourself for a multimedia experience like never before.
With a legacy spanning over 2 decades, the X Zone Radio and TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, is your ultimate source for mind-blowing entertainment and thought-provoking discussions. Join our growing community of truth seekers as we continue to unlock the world's mysteries.
So, why wait? Step into the X Zone and embark on a journey that will challenge your beliefs, ignite your curiosity, and keep you on the edge of your seat.
Remember, X Zone Nation, the truth is out there, and it's waiting for you right here on the X Zone Radio and TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell. Don't miss a minute of the action.
Tune in now on your favorite radio station or visit xzoneradiotv.com to join the adventure. The X Zone Radio TV show with Rob McConnell, where reality meets the unknown.
the X Zone radio TV show, unraveling the secrets of the universe, one episode at a time. For more information, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com.
And welcome back. This is the X Zone. I'm Rob McConnell. My special guest is my good friend, the one and only Kevin Randle, kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And Kevin, we let our listeners around the world know today that you are going to be on the show tonight, that we'd be doing this kind of special report on the Three Stooges. I mean on the...
Big yawn.
Yeah, hold on. I've just got to bring this up. There we go. How's that? U.S. House Oversight Panel I can't read behind there. Hearing on UFOs, national security, and of course we have Graves, Grush, and Fravor there. I asked them to send in some questions that they might have, and because of the time restraints, I can't read the entire 140 plus emails that were sent in, but I do have. We selected 10 at random. And let's go. Are you game for this, Kevin?
Oh, let's have at it.
All right. Let me see here. Okay, number one is Karen from Mississauga, Ontario. And her question is, how did you initially become interested in UFO investigations, Kevin? Have you ever had your own UFO experience or sighting?
Oh, I don't know how many times I've answered this question. I always blame my mother, who had an interest in science fiction, which dealt with alien visitation, extraterrestrial civilizations, travel through space. And it's just a short step into the ufology of that with travel through space. But when I was a little tiny kid, she took me to see the movie Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and that kind of sparked it.
Wow.
The only thing that has ever happened that would be remotely considered a UFO sighting, I was... still in high school, and a friend of mine were members of the Denver UFO Society, and we were in Castle Rock, Colorado, at some big meeting there, and late at night over the campfire, we saw a light crossing the sky in a polar orbit, going across the sky, got directly overhead, flashed once, and then continued on. This was the mid-1960s, so there wasn't a lot of satellites up there, and there was nothing in a polar orbit at that time that we would have been able to see from where we were. So it was just a light crossing the sky. I have no explanation for it. Probably has a mundane terrestrial explanation, but that was my UFO sighting. But the interest was sparked by my mother's interest in flying saucer, or in science fiction, and the movie Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Oh, you're lucky, because my mother drove me to drinking, and at the age of 4, they told me drinking would be bad for me. So
and
there
you
you go.
Listen.
You're right, and I'll drink to that one as well. All right, this next question is from Monty in Seattle, Washington. Kevin, can you provide us with an overview of your most famous UFO investigation?
Well, obviously it's Roswell. And do you have 4 or 5 hours to go into it? Don Schmidt contacted me from Center for UFO Studies, and they were going to reopen the Roswell investigation because nothing was going on in 1989 about it. And there were witnesses that had been sort of identified. There were other witnesses out there. And they needed somebody with a military background because many of the witnesses would be ex-military. They thought I could relate to them better. So we went to Roswell to take a look at that case, believing that we would find the mundane terrestrial explanation. And it looked like that was the way it was going to go until we met Bill Brazel, who is the son of the man that took the wreckage into Roswell. And he talked about what he had seen and what he had done. And that kind of turned the thing around for us. And we thought, well, we've got to come back. And from that, it kind of exploded. I lean toward the extraterrestrial in this because I have no terrestrial explanation. Every member of Colonel Blanchard's staff, Colonel Blanchard being the commanding officer in Roswell at the time, that we could talk to told us it was extraterrestrial or something like that, with a single exception. I just met with Tim Saunders, whose father was the adjutant in Roswell in 1947. And I have some documentation, letters from the family from the mid-1990s, talking about how their father had mentioned to him that he didn't really want to talk about this because of threats directed toward him and the family. So we do have limited documentation. The reason I mentioned the names there is because in this panel that was held yesterday, we had a lot of discussion of these sorts of things, but no names and no sources. So I wanted to make it clear that we have names, we drop names, we have some documentation. I guess the solution to the Roswell case is I have no solution. If that's sufficient to take you to the extraterrestrial, that's fine for you. I would like something a little bit more concrete to that, and I will say, but I have no terrestrial explanation.
Okay. We're going to go to Australia now. Richard from Perth, Australia. And his question is, hi, Kevin. What are some of the key findings or evidence that you have uncovered during your UFO investigations?
I think some of the best evidence is in talking to the witnesses from the Roswell case. I mean, there's a multitude of witnesses, many witnesses who handled debris or saw the craft or saw the bodies that we've been able to talk to over the years. Unfortunately, the firsthand witnesses, given the timing now, I don't think there's any of them left alive that saw this stuff, but we made videotapes, we have audio tapes, so we can corroborate what we're reporting on that. But I think looking at at that case, it's the witness testimony, especially from the high-ranking officers, the senior NCOs in Roswell at the time, men who had no earthly reason to lie about these things. Talking to finding some limited documentation. We just came up with a letter that is kind of interesting. Edwin Easley, the provost marshal in Roswell in 1947. Provost marshal is the chief of police on the military base, and he was responsible for security on the base. And he had told me one of the times I talked to him that he couldn't talk about it, the really good stuff, because he had promised the president that he wouldn't. Well, everybody says, well, you think the president's going to talk to a major? And I'm thinking, well, I can think of a number of instances where presidents talk to majors, but I would also conjecture that he probably got the word from one of the many minions of the president. He promised somebody from the president's office he wouldn't talk. And we have a letter now signed by the Secret Service, dated not long after the event, that thanks him for his cooperation. So there's kind of a bit of indirect evidence for something very unusual happening in Roswell. And Easley told me at one point, I said to him, are we following the right path? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, we think it's extraterrestrial. And he says, well, let me put it this way, it's not the wrong path. And then he told family members, as he became terminally ill, told family members a little bit more about his experiences. So we do have some good information. And as I say, every member of Colonel Blanchard's staff that we talked to, with one exception, was pretty much it was really strange. It was extraterrestrial. We don't know what it was camp.
All right, let's go to Yonkers, New York now, where Jeremy sent this email. Hi, Kevin. Can you discuss some of the books that you have authored on the topics of UFOs? Once again.
I was hoping he would like to hear about the Vietnam Ground Zero books that I've authored.
Well, let's hear about them as well.
Or some of the science fiction novels I've written, which of course now condemns me in some of the UFO field. Well, Randle, he writes science fiction. You have to be careful there. I think I've written 37 books on UFOs. I actually made a count the other day. Brad Steiger and I used to argue about who wrote the most UFO books. He thought it was me, and I thought it was him. But I've done books that deal with specific sightings. I did a book on Socorro, New Mexico, which is the Lonnie Zamora sighting from 1964, where we saw the craft on the ground and the aliens outside it. And it's one of the very, very few cases in the Project Blue Book files in which the witness talked about seeing alien creatures, and it was not labeled as a psychological problem. It turns out as you go through the evidence in that, there's other witnesses to things. So there's some corroborative detail. It's just not Lonnie Zamora saying the thing.
Okay.
I did a book on Level Land, which I think is an important sighting because literally dozens of people were involved. The craft was seen close to the ground. It stalled car engines. It knocked radios out. It dimmed headlights, left landing traces. Air Force officers were involved. The sheriff was involved. It's a very interesting case with a lot of witnesses and a lot of multiple chains of evidence and the craft interacting with the environment.
Speaking about crashes and sightings like the one you just talked about, Nobody talks about the Kecksburg incident anymore.
I think that's pretty well explained as bolide, a very bright meteor. And I hesitate to say that because I know Stan Gordon, and he's kind of a friend of mine. So I hesitate to mention that because he spent so much time investigating it. But I think the evidence leans in that direction. And I think that may be part of the problem with it.
It seems like what about Shag Harbor? Because you had the Coast Guard, you had the RCMP, you had the Canadian Navy involved, and they found nothing. I
don't think of that as a crash. I think that is a kind of a forced landing, an emergency landing type affair. But I mean, it went into the water.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, was detected underwater by some of the vessels that responded, the military vessels that responded. Chris Stiles and Don Ledger have done a wonderful job of investigating that and gathering documentation for it. The Condon Committee, which was in session at the time, the Condon Committee being the University of Colorado study that was financed by the Air Force, and they made a phone call to Canada, and they said, well, just a couple of teenagers saw some light in the sky, and they said, well, we don't need to investigate. And yet we, as you mentioned, there was police officers involved and multiple witnesses. There's a photograph of the object in the sky and all kinds of things, and then of course the military response. Very interesting case. Nothing was retrieved, but I think that they dove into the ocean to repair their craft, and once they had it fixed, they took off.
There you go. Another mystery solved here on the X-Zone.
Yes.
Let me see here. Alistair from Laughlin, Nevada. His question is, hey, Kevin, in your opinion, Kevin, what goes on behind the secretive boundaries of Area 51?
I think it's the development of the next generation of military aircraft. And it's and that's why it's super secret. Mm-hmm. You have to remember the SR-71, which is a fantastic airplane. Yeah. And if the Soviets or the Russians now got into a tail chase to intercept the SR-71 and fired missiles at it, the SR-71 could outrun the missiles. This is 1950s technology that we're talking about here. What do they have now that we don't know anything about? What is the next generation of fighter craft or reconnaissance craft or whatever? And I think that's what goes on in Area 51 is the development of that sort of technology, and that's why it's a secret.
And you know what? We've had Thornton Barnes on, who was a contractor for the CIA that worked in Area 51, and he said exactly what you just said. He worked there on the Apollo mission, the lunar lander, and some aircraft that developed there, and that's why it's so top secret. So there you go.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I think it's too bad that we all have sort of outed the place. Yeah. And so everybody knows where it is, and I wouldn't be surprised if they've moved some of the facilities away from Area 51 simply because it's now such an open secret. But I just saw nothing that suggests there was anything extraterrestrial or alien involved there.
All right, Kevin, you and I have to take our break at the bottom of the hour, so please stand by. And Kevin Randle's website is Exonation, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. This is the X-Zone. I'm Rob McConnell. Find out more about the X-Zone at our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. And we'll both be back after this message. Don't go away. Don't get abducted. Watch out for the men in black. Watch out for the Three Stooges. We'll be back.
Question: what is the name of the unique blend of coffee you get that has been formulated by a neurologist, a neurobiologist, and a pharmaceutical chemist? Answer: you get Beautiful Mind Coffee, a unique coffee blend that tastes great and has herbal ingredients that your brain will love, and it is not just coffee, it's brainalicious. Dr. Rathbone, Dr. Jang, and Dr. Winslow, the scientific team that created Beautiful Mind Coffee, decided to collaborate on a coffee focusing on brain health. As for those herbal ingredients found in Beautiful Mind Coffee, Dr. Rathbone, Dr. Jang, and Dr. Winslow, utilizing their combined extensive scientific research background, worked with many natural and herbal products until the exact formulation that is found in Beautiful Mind Coffee was created. With a unique scientific formula not found in any other coffee being sold or served, Beautiful Mind Coffee is the only coffee blend that contains 3 herbal ingredients found to aid in boosting your daily mental clarity and focus. Every cup of Beautiful Mind coffee contains scientifically formulated amounts of maca root powder, green tea extract, and American ginseng, all supporting good brain health. Taking care of your brain's health now can help delay or prevent the onset of cognitive dysfunction, including dementia, Alzheimer's, and more general memory loss as you get older, just by enjoying the delicious flavor of our roasted coffee and herbal ingredients found exclusively in Beautiful Mind Coffee. Did you know that cognitive dysfunction also refers to deficits in attention, verbal and nonverbal learning, short-term and working memory, visual and auditory processing, problem solving, processing speed, and motor functioning? For more on Beautiful Mind Coffee, the 3 scientists who formulated Beautiful Mind Coffee, and more details on the 3 unique herbal ingredients in Beautiful Mind Coffee, visit www.beautifulmindcoffee.ca. Beautiful Mind Coffee is now available online at amazon.ca and amazon.com. To order Beautiful Mind Coffee, visit www.beautifulmindcoffee.ca today.
And we're back. You said the condom committee, right? And I got a message from one of our listeners who said condom committee. I guess that's because they like to play it safe.
No, not condom, condom.
Well, we can always say the rubber bounces back, but that's for another show. Some of the top 10 historically significant whistleblowers are Edward Snowden. Remember, he exposed extensive global surveillance programs conducted by intelligence agencies such as the NSA, revealing the collection of personal data from millions of individuals. Let me see. Daniel Ellsberg, he leaked the Pentagon Papers in 1971. Chelsea Manning, formerly known as Bradley Manning, she leaked classified military and diplomatic documents to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks. Well, you know where this show's going in a hurry. Yes. Mark Felt. I didn't make that. That was just the next name that came up here. Mark Felt, also known as Deep Throat. I couldn't make this stuff up if I tried.
Oh, yes, you could.
Okay. As an FBI associate director, he anonymously shared information with investigative reporters during the Watergate scandal, during the Nixon administration, bringing Nixon down. Karen Silkwood, she was a nuclear plant employee who uncovered safety violations at the Kerr-McGee nuclear facility. Now, ultimately dying in a suspicious car accident after collecting the evidence. Sharon Watkins, she exposed the Enron scandal. Frank Serpico, a former New York police officer, Serpico blew the whistle on widespread corruption within the police department, leading to significant reforms. Then we have, let me see, Linda Tripp. She exposed President Bill Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky. And then Mark Felt, the FBI whistleblower. And now we have David Grush.
Well, there's a difference. There's a difference. Grush has presented nothing other than his tales. All those you mentioned had documentation, had witnesses, had evidence. And without that, they may have been ignored. But Grush has nothing. He has not provided the witnesses. He has not provided documentation. He has not provided the cases that he's interested in. He talks about 12 crash retrievals. He won't identify what they are other than the 2 that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And so at this point, I have little confidence that what he's saying is true. Now that could turn around tomorrow when the they come out and say, well, here are the people I talked to, and here's what they said, and here's some documentation to go with it. And at that point, I say, well, yeah, he was right. He had the goods, but to this point, we haven't seen the goods. And I think until we do see the goods, we have to be very skeptical of what he's saying.
Then why all the hype about this guy? You know, if not for News Nation, he'd still be thumping the road because no one would give him the time of day.
I wonder about that myself, but if you remember back in 1997, just prior to the big 50th anniversary of the Roswell case, Philip Corso published a book the day after Roswell,
right,
about his alleged experiences and his inside knowledge, and it got all the hype. And I mean, it still does very well on Amazon, and he's got all these positive reviews. And I'm thinking, but there's nothing in the book that he didn't get from the research that Don and I had done, or gotten off the internet, or gotten from somewhere else. There was nothing that he said in that book that we didn't already know, and probably provided to him indirectly. And he was caught in numerous confabulations, to be kind about it. He said at one point at a news conference in Roswell, and I was sitting right in the room, he said, when I was the base commander over at White Sands Missile Range, well, he was never the base commander at White Sands Missile Range because the base commanders historically were general officers. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. Even the front of the cover of his book said colonel. He wasn't a colonel. He was a lieutenant colonel. I have a great deal of respect for lieutenant colonel myself personally, but it's just the gods seem to reach down and touch people and on the shoulders, and they bubble to the surface.
A spokeswoman for AARO said in a statement that the office has not discovered any verifiable information to substantiate claims that any programs regarding the possession or reverse engineering of extraterrestrial materials have existed in the past or exist currently. She also said the department is committed to timely and thorough reporting to Congress. Who do you believe?
Well, I don't believe the part about timely and thorough reporting to Congress, but that's a whole nother argument. And I don't really believe the statement either. I think that there's a lot of information that they have not released, and I think it falls under the purview of national security, or at least they wrap it in that mantle.
Right.
As I say, I've talked to an awful lot of people, military people. People have no earthly reason to lie about these things. They're not looking to get on the stage. They're not looking to blow the whistle. They're not looking to make money off the deal. They're just sharing information with me or some of my colleagues about UFOs that make you question what the government is saying. The other thing is, when she makes a statement like that about ARROW, that's how we pronounce the acronym now, ARROW, that statement may be true, that they have not found any evidence, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist, just means they haven't found it. And that's sort of a different kettle of fish. I'm aware of situations where people would deny something, say, well, I know nothing about that, and it's because they knew nothing about it, but the situation was real. In my involvement with intelligence functions. And that's the other thing. If I get information, I learn stuff from a classified source, and yet somebody approaches me from outside the news media, for example, and asks me questions about it because they've got it from their sources, I can't verify that information. I have to lie about it because I got it from classified sources, and it made no difference whether or not that information was public knowledge. If I said, yes, it's true, then suddenly they've got someone with credentials verifying that information. I got a call when I was at Richards Gebaur Air Force Base, which was south of Kansas City. I got a call one day from a reporter for the Kansas City Star. And he was just looking for an intelligence officer to talk to, and somehow the call got directed to me. And he was telling me about this thing and says, can you tell me about it? And I said, no, I haven't heard a thing about that. I don't know what you're talking about, which was a blatant lie. I knew all about it, but I had read the classified documents, so I couldn't verify it. So that was what I had to, if I said, well, I can neither confirm nor deny it, then that is in essence kind of confirming it. So I just said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And he was, well, you're not a very good intelligence officer, are you? And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm really good. I got you fooled, don't I?
Something else that caught my attention yesterday, not directly said or quoted during the subcommittee, but a bipartisan group of senators led by Majority Leader Chuck Schumer introduced an amendment to the annual defense spending bill currently making its way through Congress. The measure, modeled off legislation aimed at revealing government's records about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, would require executive branch agencies to hand over UAP records to a review board. So is Schumer saying that there's a connection between the assassination of President Kennedy and the UAPs?
No, what he was saying in that was there was a 94-page document that the Senate created back years ago where they were trying to pass legislation that would require the release of documents about the Kennedy assassination. And what Schumer had done was he modeled his request for information about the UFOs on that document. And in fact, I did an analysis of that on my blog, and the line I used in that, and we all know how well that worked out. So the model probably wasn't the best, but it always falls back to national security. And it also said, I think it also said that President Biden would have oversight on this, and he could change the committee's recommendations or what they were releasing. He could either require more data to be released or required some of it to be withdrawn. So it wasn't in the public arena. So it sounds interesting. It sounds like it's going to be fun. It's going to be helpful. But I think, look back at how well that sort of legislation worked in the Kennedy assassination. It didn't work really at all. I guess they released some 4,000 documents in the Kennedy assassination, but there's an awful lot of information that was not released at that time. And it will be in the same boat with the UFOs. I refuse to call them UAPs, by the way.
In your opinion, do members of Congress actually need access to classified documents?
I think there's maybe an overabundance of sharing with the Congress because they tend to leak stuff an awful lot that they maybe shouldn't. Mm-hmm. That can be beneficial to our competitors in the world. But there's also they have a responsibility for oversight and keeping some restraints on what the other aspects of the government do. We don't want to turn the United States into a police state, although I guess the Patriot Act has sort of done that. But we have to be careful. So yeah, they do have a responsibility to know what's going on, but I think there's certain programs that it might be better that they're not read into simply because of the national security implications. But I think that would be a very narrow group of projects and things. They control the budget. They have to pay for these things. And I think what was the last figure? There was $30 billion in black projects that nobody knows really what they're about. It's money just funneled into various organizations to do whatever they're doing and under the guise of national security.
Kevin, you and I have to take our final break. Exonation. To find out more about Kevin, read his blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Visit our website at xzoneradiotv.com. And to listen to all the fine shows that we have on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit xzbn.net. I'm Rob McConnell. We'll be back as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone on the other side of the short break, so don't go away.
So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. SIMULTV.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me.
SIMULTV.com, sonny boy.
SIMULTV.com.
SIMULTV.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
SIMULTV.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. SIMULTV.com.
Kevin Randle's my guest. KevinRandle.blogspot.com is his blogspot. And if you'd like to contact us here at the X Zone, it's xzoneradiotv.com. My personal email address, Mr. X at xzoneradiotv.com. All right, Kevin, let's get back to some of the questions that the listeners have sent in. We only have about 13 minutes left on the clock. Let's go. This is from Matt in Houston, Texas. Kevin, do any of your books present any unique theories or perspectives on the UFO phenomena? If so, in your opinions, are they from outer space or are they interdimensional?
In some of my books, I do present some theories. I did a book 30 years ago called The October Scenario. And the sort of the thesis was that most of the UFO sightings we'd been talking about didn't exist, but there was a period in 1973 where we had a very intense period of UFO sightings with them landing and abductions and all of that sort of thing. And that was really the only time we had real UFO sightings. Unfortunately, I don't think the theory works in today's environment. Another theory I came up with, and some people thought I was serious, I said that the crash in Roswell they did on purpose because the best or the easiest or the greatest non-threatening way to announce their presence to the world is in a crash flying saucer with dead aliens, because they're non-threatening that way. And some people thought I was serious about that. I just thought it was kind of an interesting, fun little theory, but I didn't subscribe to it. I do not really subscribe to the interdimensional, although it's certainly possible, and I think the possibility is very, very remote. I don't really subscribe to the time travel idea. Although I like that idea because it's a lot of fun to do, and I've done some science fiction books about time travel that were fun to do. I lean toward the extraterrestrial because that seems to be where the evidence leads, but we don't get to the end of the road, and that's the real bugaboo. We need something more than the eyewitness testimony. We've got some interesting photographs. We've got some electronic means of collecting data that provides some interesting data and that sort of thing. But we just don't have that final smoking gun about leading us to the extraterrestrial or a terrestrial explanation. I don't know of any terrestrial explanation that would explain the UFO sightings as they've been developed. Yeah, we can explain a lot of them as mundane stars and planets misidentified, or meteorological phenomena that's not understood, or things seen under unusual circumstances, which was the kind of what I did for my PhD dissertation, was the identification of ambiguous stimuli and how belief structure affected that. And if you believed in UFOs and you saw something you couldn't quite explain, then you looked at it as an alien craft, or if you were very religious, you might look at it as some kind of a spiritual manifestation. So we look at all that, but there is a core of information, a core of good sightings that simply have not been explained in a terrestrial terms. And that's kind of what I look at, but I want something more than that.
Yesterday during the congressional hearing, even David Grush made a statement to the fact that these could in fact be extra-dimensional. Or interdimensional, yeah.
That theory is circulated through the UFO community for literally decades. There are those who believe that's the explanation for it, and that eliminates the bugaboo of interstellar travel. and the speed of light being the limiting factor. If they're interdimensional, then they're right here already. And if they found a way of moving between our universe and their universe or whatever, that eliminates that problem. So yeah, that's one. And as I say, I'm aware of it. I just don't subscribe to it as being the explanation. I think in more a nuts and bolts situation and a more interstellar solution for that.
All right, let's go to Quebec now. Sheila from St. Bruno, Quebec. Have you ever encountered skepticism or criticism regarding your UFO investigations or books? And if so, how do you handle it?
Oh, all the time. All the time. I think that if you cannot defend your theory or your position, then you have failed in your task. But it's not really the skeptics, the debunkers that have bothered me. It's other members of the UFO community who have attacked me viciously. And I mentioned kind of jokingly talking about my science fiction novels. A number of the prominent members of the UFO community says, well, you have to watch out for Randle because he writes science fiction. And that's apparently the only day job that disqualifies you from being a UFO researcher is if you write science fiction. And then you can look at other UFO researchers who have written science fiction books, but you can also look at a number of the most prominent scientists, and they've written science fiction books. So I don't see it as a qualifying factor. But yes, I've been attacked quite a bit from that point of view.
All right, and let me see. Let's go to the U.S. Virgin Islands now. Patricia, who lives in St. Thomas. Hi, Kevin. Could you discuss any significant discoveries or breakthroughs that you yourself have made in UFO research?
I think one of the most important discoveries was bringing the Roswell case to the forefront. Yeah, there was others who talked about it, but I think it was Don Schmidt and I who, when we wrote the UFO crash at Roswell, started the whole kind of march toward to the Roswell case, and others came in, and it was some of the things that we had discovered about talking to the witnesses there and providing that information that broke through. I think one of the most significant discoveries is in the Leveland case, in that book Leveland. In looking through the documentation, I found notes that the sheriff had gone out to look for the UFO that night. The Air Force wrote it off. He saw a streak of light in the distance, but before the Air Force got involved in the investigation, he had told a number of reporters and later confirmed it to other UFO investigators years later that he had seen an oval-shaped object that was bright red. The next day, he took his car into the mechanic to see if there's anything wrong with it. And that tells me that he got close enough to the UFO that it stalled his car. And this is significant for this reason. The sheriff was in one car. Behind him was a car with state police, the Texas Department of Public Safety. And in the car behind that were officers from Reese Air Force Base. So if the sheriff got close enough to see the UFO and it stalled his car, the Air Force officers did as well. And so now we not only have the sheriff talking about this sort of thing, we now have the possibility of Air Force officers being involved in the investigation. I think that's a very significant thing to have found.
I agree. And finally, Bertrand from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hi, Kevin. Do you believe that your books and research have influenced the UFO community and the general public's perception of UFOs and ETs? And if so, how?
I think the first book, UFO Crash at Roswell, when Don and I began that investigation, nobody was really talking about the Roswell case. Stan Friedman was off on his horse chasing the MJ-12 documents, as was Bill Moore. Other researchers were looking at that, but Roswell had sort of faded away after the publication of the book in 1980, in the Roswell incident. We kind of focused our attention on Roswell, and we did a couple of books on that. And I think that caused an explosion in the interest in the case. And it eventually, I think, resulted in the Air Force becoming interested enough in the case to reinvestigate it, even though we don't do UFO investigations, and yet we have them looking into some of that information about the Roswell case. So I think that was one of the influences that was very positive. And I think some of the other work that we've done, looking at it from a somewhat of a skeptical point of view, but what we attempt to do is present the evidence as best we can with the sources and the information so you can understand how we came to our specific conclusions. And I think that's influenced a number of people and a number of activities as well, looking at it from a logical point of view and not getting deep into the woo-woo, but looking at here is the best cases that we can with multiple witnesses and multiple chains of evidence and that sort of thing.
I'd like to thank all our listeners and our viewers for sending in these questions. Before we go, Kevin, we've got about 4 minutes. Craig was just telling me. The books, the Vietnam book you've written, or the war series, tell us about those.
Well, back in the 1980s, Bob Cornett and I were going to science fiction. We wanted to be science fiction writers. We were going to science fiction conventions to meet. The editors attend science fiction conventions. We thought if the editors knew who we were, they might be more inclined to give us a break. And we met an agent there who signed us up. And she called me one day and wanted to know if I could write books about the Green Berets in Vietnam. And I said, of course. If she'd asked, can you write books about nurses in hospitals? I would have said, yeah, of course. But she had sold a publisher on the idea of a series of books about the Vietnam War. And so Bob Cornett and I sat down and developed a series called Vietnam Ground Zero. And the books were published, I think there's 32 of them that were published up until the early 1990s. And then they went out of print, and just recently, the last couple of years, an English publisher has reissued the books, and they're doing very well. The Vietnam Ground Zero series by Eric Helm, by the way. And I've since written 2 additional books for that series, new books. That one of them's coming out soon, and the other one is due to the publisher in just a couple of months. So I did that, and at the same time, I was doing, other publishers had contacted me to do other books that related to UFOs. I did a series on the Navy SEALs. I did a series called Wings Over Nam, which has just been reissued as well. So, and it's based on my experiences. One of the reviews, and this is the thing that annoys me, the reviewers for Amazon, they don't have to have any credentials. And some guy wrote in and said I had confused the left seat, right seat in the helicopter. And he was very annoyed about that and wondered about my expertise. And the point was, the helicopter is designed with the pilot in command, the captain, sitting in the right seat and the co-pilot in the left seat, which is opposite of the way it is in the airplanes.
Right.
Yet, but in Vietnam, in our units, the units I was associated with, the aircraft commander sat in the left seat because the vision was better outside of the aircraft in that seat. So I didn't confuse it. I knew what I was talking about. It was just, we didn't use the conventional aircraft commander in the right seat, the aircraft commander sat in the left seat. And that kind of annoyed me because he was making like I didn't know what I was talking about. And of course I did, because I'd been an aircraft commander in Vietnam. So I knew what I was talking about. But the book is a lot of the books are based on my experience. And I got a letter from one of the members of one of the units I was in a number of years ago, sent to the publisher, and he forwarded it to me. And he said, one of the writers of Eric Helm, Eric Helm was in Vietnam because he recognized the description of the base at Cu Chi. I knew what it looked like, and I could describe it accurately. So the books have that kind of, I guess, non-fictional aspect to it. Of course, they're all fictional accounts, but there's a lot of information that was drawn on my experiences in Vietnam. And I think
and all your books are available on your website at kevinrandle.blogspot.com.
And certainly at Amazon and other platforms.
Kevin, as usual, time goes by so fast when you're with me, my friend. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us here on the X Zone. And I understand that yesterday during the committee hearing, you got a couple of hours sleep, so I'm happy for you for that as well. Kevin, let's do this again, my friend. Take care of yourself. You're always in our thoughts and our prayers, Kevin. And once again, thank you for your service. Well, thank you, Rob. I appreciate the kind words, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. You take care, my good friend, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in a short matter of time. Well, you know where I live, unfortunately. But I've stopped sending the pizzas like you asked me. Kevin Randle, take care, good friend. Thank you. All right, Exo Nation will be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue investigating the paranormal, looking for answers to unsolvable problems, and wondering why I ever stopped delivering all those pizzas to Kevin Randle's house. I'm Rob McConnell. We'll be back. Don't go away.